The quality of writing and entertainment has been plummeting off a cliff in the last few years, but I thought I could at least blame the writers themselves for it. Turns out, that may not be the case. There's an entire second layer of destructive influence over this stuff. This is the kind of thing that you hear about, you're vaguely aware of, but you don't realize how deep the rabbit hole goes. That's what I fell down recently. This was a journey where I found out that people are predictable, they affect more than you think, and the reasoning behind it rests on a throne of lies. Now, of course, the journey started with the editing of James Bond. Talk me through how it affects films and television, all the way to them demanding we rebuild our entire civilization for a person who's a few inches shorter. The people which are destroying historic books or rewriting movies and television series are literally the same people complaining about how high a door handle is or want a staircase to be a few millimeters smaller. And they're not hired for their skill or creativity, they're not hired on merit. That's actually antithetical to the very idea of this job position. No, these people are hired for their lived experience, and for some reason think that the way they were born gives them the right to destroy some of the most beloved texts throughout all of history, while lacking the self-awareness, humility, or even morality to realize that they shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Welcome to the ultimate grift. Now, books are a great example of this, especially classic literature, because you have the example pre and post when they came in and edited it. The issue is a lot of the grifters are actually brought in before something is ever published, and so you will never realize the destructive influence that they had on the text to begin with. This is especially true when it comes to films and TV. So if you're watching something like "This is awful, what are they talking about? It sounds like it's been written by a 3-year-old. Well, you don't know whether the scriptwriter did it or one of the experts that they've drafted in. Because of all of the changes that I've seen, not only do none of them improve on the actual text, they all sound like they're written by 3-year-olds. But Kate Clancy is an author who was told that she couldn't refer to reality because, reality's changed now. The manuscript was reviewed before publication and highlighted potentially offensive stuff. Is it offensive? If a situation exists in reality and then the situation changes so it's somehow legitimized, does that make the past offensive? Because that's the exact situation that happened here. One UK publisher wanted his novel to be reviewed because of a disability, despite the fact that the author was disabled himself and the character has the same condition as the author. And remember that because it comes important later. That's one of the founding lies that their entire argument is based upon, and it's already proven incorrect that they bring something that the author can't. We don't censor your work, we just put it within context of an experience that you can't possibly have. Now, wherever there's money and a job opportunity, you'll always find someone who is completely incapable of doing it, desperately trying to get the job. But there is a strategy, a way that's been implemented in order to force yourself into positions that you haven't earned and don't deserve. Now, these positions, although relatively new, haven't just sprung up this last couple of weeks. This is an article from 2020 talking about the effect that they have in film and TV. And this entire article is just guilt-tripping people into hiring the readers.
I'm weird and no one likes me!
Because you see, even the strongest advocates for social justice may fall into these problems and need one of us to get you out of it. I know your books have been incredibly popular, even with massive movie franchises since the early 20th century, but have you considered which orifice I decide to put myself inside? Every international author must consider that, because if you don't, you may just not understand the complexity of a situation. Or you may build something from misinformation. And you wouldn't want that, would you? And although this is a talk about films and TVs, and we all know books are already affected, even in 2018, they were going through Legendary Digital and Wizards of the Coast. We all know how that turned out. A sponsored content campaign about Magic the Gathering. But Alex here can use extensive personal, educational, and critical skills, alleviate unintentional bias and problematic content. As defined by her, because that's what all this is, the problematic content, is defined by the person reading it. And they're like, no, I can read this, I can read your original bigoted text, and it won't affect me, but it can't go out to the masses. Oh, it would incredibly affect them. Those people can't handle it, but I can. And then I can satiate it for you, improve it, in order to allow the plebs something that they are allowed to see. Now, Alex here actually has her own website, which tells us exactly the job she does, where she edits manuscripts, films and TV scripts, focusing on specific issues like representation, unconscious bias, because, you know, you're a complete bigot when you're asleep, unintentionally insensitive language, so I assume she's fine with J.K. Rowling, who says things deliberately, cultural inaccuracies, inauthenticities, and we're going to say authenticity again because we're a terrible writer. We're like hiring real emergency room doctors to consult on a medical show, because despite the fact that an emergency room doctor actually is an expert in something and has a skill, it's really important they want to position themselves as an authority figure. to put themselves above the author, so the author feels pressured in order to take the advice. For instance, we get this from the Scottish Book Trust, who say, if you're writing a police procedural, you may want to ask a police person. They mean policeman because man means human. You should have got an editor for this, they probably could have fixed your mistakes. To look over your script and spot any issues with the police procedures. To them, sensitivity reading is akin to this, but even more significant. It is more important that you hire someone based off orifices alone than it is to make sure that the police procedures are accurate in your police procedural book. There are some topics you dive into and you realize everyone involved in this has the IQ of a spoon. Because otherwise you'd ask the question, why would an author do this in the first place? You're just someone off the street who has no idea what they're talking about, and I'm an internationally best-selling author. Why should I take your advice? Well, it's because I'm above you and I know better than you. That's why all of this language is couched in things like, we just recommend or suggest ways that you could alleviate or incorporate these things. But if you don't, you're a terrible person because you're listening to someone who knows better than you do about the problem. It's all passive-aggressive and relies on shame and guilt. It relies on the good morals of the author to pressure them into doing something repulsive, destroy their own creativity and make themselves subservient to this external force. Because don't you know, you may include characters within your books and you might accidentally stereotype them or engage in tokenism. Never stop Disney, and I'm sure they've got an army of these people. But these create almost universally richer, more dynamic, and wider-ranging audiences. Don't you understand? If you embrace our ideology, it will actually become more profitable for you. We actually ensure that your characters have depth, empathy, and awareness. Because as a best-selling author, you can't do that yourself. But if you hire someone with absolutely no talent in the industry, they're bound to improve your work. And how is she going to make your business more profitable? Well, Alex's worldview is one that's progressive. It's focusing on moving forwards. It's intersecting with all of the non-dangly bits and has a wide range of expertise available, such as knowing all about Christianity and atheism. Doesn't matter which angle you're going for, even when the two are directly contradictory. Don't worry, we can sort you out over here. But the key points are, we help you avoid some kind of pitfall. We'll make you more profitable. And without us, you're definitely going to mess up. It really reeks to me of, that's a nice book you've got there. Be a shame if something happened to it. The whole idea is pitched as if, this is for you, this is for your benefit, but if you don't hire us, you are going to absolutely destroy your own book and you're never going to be successful again. Under everything is this threat that if you don't hire us, you're going to have a social media storm because you're going to put your foot in it. There's all these landmines been placed throughout society. They've not been placed there accidentally. And if you don't have me, who put the landmines there in the first place to guide you through them? Well, you're going to fail. The issue is this narrative falls apart as soon as you dig into any of this. But how do you get these positions if you're such an expert, such an authority, that you can make an international best-selling author more money, despite the fact that you can't replicate that success yourself? How do you even get qualified for this in the first place? Well, from Vice, we get an article describing what they do. As you can understand, Vice are incredibly enthusiastic about trying to desperately jump in front of this bullet, laughing about how people editing books is actually being called censorship. Imagine that. But it turns out that the way someone gets hired into this industry is you just have to be part of an issue, a theme. Maybe you're disabled or part of the alphabet. Now, obviously, Philippa Willits isn't going to be talking about anything regarding skin color. I mean, as a white woman, she wouldn't dare go near that subject.
I am so sick of rich guys like you, not only not realizing how much is handed to them, but still thinking they're the victims when they mess everything up because of their lazy entitlement and fragile egos.
But, I just go through manuscripts and give feedback. It's not my job to say you must not say this. I just provide feedback. I let you decide whether you want to make that change or not. But if you don't make the change, you're going to bat it on Twitter, and your entire book is going to fail because I'm the authority figure, and you're just the writer. The passive-aggressive guilt just seeps off the page. Now, this article is about Roald Dahl, somebody who said he would send a crocodile after his publishers if they changed one word of what he wrote. But remember, we're an expert. We just offer things about unfamiliar cultures, maybe a skill set that you don't know, or perhaps we have different chemical makeup in our skin than you do, despite the fact that they still go through books even when that isn't true. Because it's the Mott and Bailey defense. We're going to say one thing while actually doing another. We're going to say it's just to make sure that you've got an expert testimony about this one subject. And then we're going to go through and we're going to change everything to the point where Bond could hear the audience panting and grunting like pigs in a trough. He felt his own hands gripping the tablecloth, his mouth was dry, changes to Bond could sense the electric tension in the room. These people have the writing talent of a 3-year-old. Not only do these things not say the same thing, but this is something an idiot would write. There's far more detail and flair in this. You can feel the atmosphere. It paints an image in your mind. And this is just like, sense the electric tension, yeah? Yeah, mate, word in it, bruv. I mean, seriously, who even rewrote this? Prince Harry? But why do you want to rewrite all of this stuff? Why do you want to come in and stop people being called fat, if that's an accurate description of the reality of the situation? Oh, well, I don't like that word. It doesn't matter if you don't like the word. It only matters if that is an accurate representation of the image we're trying to get across. The entire point of a book is to describe the situation. It doesn't matter if you get offended by reality. So why do they want to change the words that describe reality? Why do, as they said at The Observer, they want to remove the nuance and true meaning in the English language? Why would anyone want to get an outside party to strip the language of meaning? Well, the conversation do take issue with the phrase, our use of the English language. The notion that the English language belongs to a tiny subset of the global mass reveals a problem with proprietorship. I'm not being funny, but the clue's in the name. To whom does the English language belong? I don't know, I just can't work out who owns Steve's car. But to think that meaningful writing is only created by actually successful authors is humorously provincial and at worst contemptuous gatekeeping. Who would have thought that the success of an author would actually be gatekept? Me, for one. I would want that to be incredibly gatekept. You want to know what I want that to be gatekept by? Talent, success, ability, creativity. These are all things which will naturally gatekeep meaningful writing in English. But that's not what happens with sensitivity readers. They don't have to make anything talented or creative. They don't need any of the ability or the merit. They weren't hired on merit in the first place. They weren't interviewed for skill. They don't need any ability to write or understand English or its complexity. They don't need the nuance, or the ability to draw an image in your mind, create a story and a narrative from scratch. They can't do any of that. You know what their ability is? Do you want to know why they were hired? Because we had a list already drawn out of the qualifications that you need in order to get this job. The reasons why you're hired. Were you born with dangly bits? Which orifice do you stick yourself in? Geographic location. Alternative activism. Whether your swimmers work. Whether you are or are not religious. Somehow oppressed. The last one is literally the only skill or talent on this entire list. Everything else had nothing to do with ability or merit. There was nothing that had to be evolved here, iterated on, improved. Nothing which actually improved a work. It was just aspects of what somebody is. We have managed to get an entire group of people who have grifted themselves a career based on, well, I'm just this, and so I think you need to give me money. Because if you don't, you're going to fall into a problem and get absolutely annihilated on social media. It's a nice book you've got. It'd be a shame if something happened to it, because you didn't employ me. Just like in a previous video where I spoke of actors only pushing an idea that you need me in this position, you need to increase this group. It all just happened to be things which they were themselves. It allowed them to get more opportunities for jobs, so that they could climb the pole and pull the ladder up behind them. It's greedy, it's selfish, it's destroying entertainment, and it's only done for personal gain. Pitching themselves as the authority, the superior to the actual person that created the work, and creating a problem for them to solve. We're going to go on the internet and just complain about everything. Rant about how Hogwarts Legacy is this, this, or this. But don't worry, there is a solution to me ranting about this problem, and that is you can hire me in the first place. It's an incredible grift. It's been going on since the dawn of time. We used to call it a protection racket. But don't worry, it gets worse. Sensitivity readers are often thought to be left-wing or progressive. Is that necessarily the case? Yes. But that's not a bad thing. We don't want to limit what authors can say. I just want to make sure that this is right. I want to make sure that you cover the issue appropriately. You need to be authentic and not inadvertently upset people. This isn't some kind of authoritarian tool. Despite the fact that I position myself above you and tell you you need me and you should do this thing. Oh, it's optional. But if you don't, well, that's when the heavies come in and you'll have trouble on social media. Don't worry though, it's not authoritarian, you're not forced to. But if you don't, you're a bad person. One of the benefits of passive aggressiveness is it allows you to be incredibly aggressive, but give just enough leeway to go, well, it wasn't me. I mean, I had nothing to do with it. The moment you're actually pushed on anything. Don't want to be nailed down, don't want to commit. I'm sure you think you've come up with an incredibly clever workaround of that's not what I'm doing. Even after you've said that all of these readers are left-wing and progressive, and that only they know what is right and how to cover an issue appropriately. The built-in assumption is that only one side is correct. Only they know the right side. And they're affecting everything. They're going into movies, they're rewriting books. and they're all changing them to specifically one point of view. This is why they go in and say, oh no, I'm just going to make sure that this accent is correct, or you don't understand what it's like to be Romanian, so we get a Romanian to come in and talk about Romanian culture. Most people wouldn't have a problem with that. Until you start messing with other things. You start talking about everything else because you're all in agreement from one side. Love to talk about diversity without actually having any of it at all. But you know, this is just one person. But is there anything we can find out about these right opinions that we can talk about? Well, this is Philippa Willits being interviewed for Vice. This is where she tweeted out about that article. And she's a writer, editor, journalist, doesn't have dangly bits. And normally I'd think it weird if in your Twitter bio you had like, well, my body has this kind of problem. But in this case, that's like genuinely a qualification. It's like putting down a master's degree when you're talking about sensitivity readers. Now, just to prove I'm not cherry picking like was accused of the Roald Dahl edits, this is where she tweeted that out. And 1, 2, 3 above that is where she complains about cities. Don't you realize our architects can't have dangly bits? That's the only way to solve the problems of civilization. And the same place, we complained about door handles or the heights of staircases. But apparently, cities need to be entirely changed because women have a different perspective on it. Men just can't understand what it's like to walk around a city without dangly bits. That's correct, because you've got 2 legs and arms, and I do have a lot of experience with those, so not exactly sure what your problem is. Are you saying if I had significant pec muscles, then they'd be able to hit the door before I could reach the door handle? I'm so confused. But this is apparently a major problem because there's no non-dangly bit tradition in building design. And because men didn't crowbar them into positions they didn't want to be part in, that's a major issue. So instead, this group, literally called The Matrix, seriously, you couldn't make this stuff up, decided to go around destroying cities by removing car-dominated planning, because nothing makes massive cities easier to traverse than removing the ability to drive through them. Apparently, that's just common sense. Not that this was based on talent or actually improving anything to begin with, no. It was just about trying to make people with no dangly bits feel like they were creating the project. A key part of everything we did was to make the language and the practice of architecture more transparent and accessible to non-experts. This is a group that wanted to open up architecture to non-experts. I don't know about anyone else, but if I want my house designed, I want it designed by an expert, somebody that actually knows what they're doing. I want the planning of cities gate-kept to people that actually know about this stuff, but that's not what this is. We need to include everybody, even people that have no idea what they're talking about. This was the sensitivity reader of city building. People that are hired for aspects of their identity in order to change what an actually talented writer has done. You think you know better than Ian Fleming without even having a series even beginning to scratch on what he's achieved. Now, we do have other examples of sensitivity readers. This is Virginia Mendez, and her name is a link. I did want to see a profile, but for some reason that page doesn't exist. But she does have her own website with the talents and abilities listed on it, and actually disagrees with Puffin's approach to editing Roald Dahl. Not that she doesn't think it's incorrect, because obviously we all agree here. All of these readers come from one single point of view. Of course they agree. There's obviously cracks within the work. You think a piece of literature surviving this long, being popular for this long, means it has some kind of inherent value that speaks to reality? No. Don't you understand? It's full of cracks. So you know, it's not progressive. This is history, and that's bad. No, we shouldn't just paper over it. This is a golden opportunity to embrace and encourage critical thinking in children. Don't you understand? We shouldn't cover this up. We should get them to think about it. Now is the perfect time to teach them how to think like we do. And all you've done by trying to paper over it is you've current backlash. You've shown people what they're doing, and you shouldn't have done that, because now they've conceded and decided to publish both versions. Although, let's be honest, unless those things are obviously marked, in which case people would only ever buy the unedited ones, they could make 1 million of the edited and 1 of the unedited, and they would still have told the truth. You need to be careful when companies come out with this kind of stuff, because you can simultaneously make that not a lie and completely different to what everyone assumes they mean very easily. But instead of editing the language and applying pate, why not add to it or place it within context? Accompany the text with questions that might ignite conversation. With the benefit of hindsight, now we disagree with terms like fat and ugly, and I don't disagree. Do they accurately describe reality? Do they accurately describe what you're talking about? Because that's the point of words. To transfer an idea or an image from my mind into yours. That's the only reason we use words to begin with. Which is what she's trying to do with these questions, you know? To show that our society has evolved. We've moved on. Yes, Roald Dahl used to be majorly popular, but you shouldn't do that now because that's wrong. That's horrible. You shouldn't really be reading this. Society has changed. and I define when it's changed. We can explain that we no longer use certain terms, and words have a power to exclude or wound. Sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. A phrase which she's never been told in her life, apparently. No, now we must teach children that society has moved on to the point where everyone is fragile and weak, where vibrations traveling through the air is the worst thing that can happen to you. There's no better time to engage with children than reading. This is someone who specifically has a certain target demographic in mind. The way society progresses is a journey that kids need to understand and feel part of. We need to get them when they're young and tell them that everything in the past is wrong and everything in the future is obviously better. We need to continue to move forwards, because despite what you may have thought, all of those centuries or thousands of years of wisdom, which has been communally gathered by everyone that came before, they don't know what they're talking about. I'm 23. Obviously, I know better, and kids need to know that. They need to know that you come to me for your advice, and you feel part of going into the future and destroying everything from the past as well. She doesn't have a problem with destroying Roald Dahl's work. She just thinks it was a wasted opportunity to change the thinking of children, to change them solely in one single direction, one which is obviously right, and the only way to cover anything appropriately. Ironically, she says we can't wrap our kids up in cotton wool or sanitize life for them, despite that being the exact prescribed idea behind this entire career path. Unless you write an article which is a bit too honest. Virginia Mendez here does have her own website, where she considers herself an expert speaker on parenting without dangly bits, how to complain at work, and unlearning what we know. Now, you'll have to correct me if I'm wrong, but deliberately unlearning what you know is becoming deliberately ignorant. You know, I went through life, I gained all of this experience and knowledge, and now I need to forget it. To learn from you and engage with your ideas, I have to actually become thicker than I am deliberately, and you're gonna tell me how to do it. But no, obviously, this is about turning yourself into a blank slate so that they can fill you with, a replacement group of ideas. Ideas like mums should stop being selfless. Yeah, apparently, if you're a mother, your baby isn't the most important thing. And despite the fact that women are always praised for being selfless, it's not actually a compliment. And also, despite the fact that your career involves going around telling people that I am this and this and this and this, and that gives me power over you, and you should listen to me. Should we have to listen to everybody? Well, my husband always tells me that I'm very passionate about things and think I'm always right, which I'm surprised by, because of course I think I'm always right. Now, you may think that you need to listen to other opinions. And yes, of course I do, but I don't need to listen to a man's opinion. No, I need to listen to people solely based on their biology. You see, if you were born with a different chemical composition, obviously you have something to say that I need to learn. You go out onto the beach for a couple of days and you can just feel the sun imparting you with extra knowledge and wisdom. You see, I don't need to listen to people that know less than me. People who explain about why my beliefs have gone too far. And when I state that, I come across as arrogant. As if the nice thing to do would be to act and engage in conversation as if our opinions were equally valid. I find that even in my career and expertise, bearing in mind we have a list of what the qualifications are for this career path, stating that I am an expert in the topic is not socially acceptable. Just because social issues are not perceived as important as medicine, it doesn't mean it's not equally as absurd for me. Is it any wonder when you have these beliefs that you get shows like Velma?
Why wouldn't he? If I were a rich white dude, I'd kill everybody just to get away with it. She has no brain!
Because in James Bond, they change people from pretty law-abiding chaps I would have thought, except when they've drunk too much, to pretty law-abiding chaps I would have thought, despite the fact that by removing the end, you actually remove the context that these people are criminals in the gold and diamond trade. You've actively made the book wrong to the point where the reader has no idea what's going on, or because you wanted to remove physical descriptors from the books, to the point where in the novel the race of a doctor and an immigration officer were completely unmentioned, as does a henchman, so the reader has no idea what these people look like at all. Because on the one hand, they're entirely stripping descriptors away so that the audience can't even understand what's going on, but in Velma, that wasn't touched at all, and that had some repulsive stuff in it.
Fred is probably innocent.
Yeah, but isn't it comforting to see a rich white guy get wrongly convicted for once?
I'm too distracted to enjoy it.
What?
Not only are you brilliant, who more than you would appreciate the advantages of being a handsome, rich white man? I was reminded that hot, popular girls your age don't yet realize how much the deck is stacked against them.
But that's because these readers, even if they were used on that product, they wouldn't have changed anything. Because do you remember Philippa Wilters here? She's like, oh, I may talk about people who have one leg, but because of where I fall on the Dulux color chart, I'm not going to do anything about race. That'd be stupid. Even if she got hold of Velma, she wouldn't have altered it, because she doesn't think it's her place, because she agrees with it. Because Velma comes from a specific place. All the ideas within Velma come from a specific place. They all line up exactly in the same direction, which is what all of this is about. This may be a load of talentless grifters who get a job that they couldn't possibly be qualified for by going, okay, well, I'm big boned, I think I can talk about that, love. Do you have any editing experience? No, because otherwise I'd be an editor. Okay, can you write? Well, no, because otherwise I'd be an author. But what I can do is entirely change the use of English that somebody's doing. What I do know is that I can come from this very specific direction, and I can change things so, it's right and covers things appropriately from the right direction. The conversation hated the idea that certain writing would be meaningful in English, or they may cling to this area of ownership. What do you mean you own English? If you think you own it, I can't change it, and that's a problem. Because words control how we think. It's how I transmit messages from my mind to your mind. But if I can change the words involved, if I can change the context and the meaning underneath the words to begin with, then I can force you to think in a different way. I can get you to use words that accept different presuppositions of ideas, that already assume that some things are good and some things are bad. And by removing certain terminology from books together, we can actually stop them being used. And as a kid, my reading age was awful until I joined the library, and then I burned through books. Everything about how I talk comes from those books. My turn of phrase comes from the way they were written at the time. And if they were all changed, I'd speak like a very different person. I might be a different person. And with this, going through movies, television, books, you will only change it in one direction. And they think that's not a bad thing. They think it's important that you unlearn what you know, or to change the past, to put it within new context, and tell children from an early age about how the way society progresses. And this is a journey that you need to understand and should be a part of. That you should teach them that there's only one right way to be, one way to talk about something appropriately. That arrogance is actually a virtue, because it'd be stupid to act as if anyone else has an opinion that would be equally valid as yours. Because after all, you come from the correct perspective, remember. And it's just common sense that men have no clue what they're talking about. No data, no personal experience, no understanding of how things work. They just have a gut feeling that we're against them. They get confused when I refuse to engage with them from a place of equals, because they wouldn't consider themselves to be equal because they're the ones who are actually right. And so by disagreeing, well, you're just wrong. It makes your work wrong, it makes your script wrong, it makes everything about you abhorrent to them, because they are the position of authority, coming to tell you, the author, what's best. You can either agree with them, or you're evil, and they won't come at you from a position of equals, despite the fact that they couldn't do what you were doing in the first place. They couldn't create these works, and so they sit there, sucking all of the energy, the money, the profitability out of the project. We already had editors that actually had to have talent in the industry, but instead we've added a second layer over it, one which isn't there to improve a work. What it's there is to censor, to alter, to make sure that everything ever created comes from a certain perspective. The right one. Full of people who want to change the height of door handles or cut off a few centimeters from steps. The petty. The people who have decided that it's up to them to change society and learn how society progresses into the future. Is it any wonder with this that good entertainment has been destroyed? I'm not even sure you can write good entertainment underneath this, because sure, you'll get stuff like Velma that agrees with the correctors in the first place. But to be actually good entertainment, you need to be the exact opposite of that. Take Velma and do the opposite is very likely good advice for any animation. And it is very good advice for these readers themselves. Because they don't care about your knowledge or experience. That's just the excuse they get to force themselves through the door. Even if you have every piece of experience they ask for, it's still going to get done. Because we can try and claim that it's all about offense, like that matters at all. But really, it's about altering the terms and attitudes that were commonplace. It's about changing your past, destroying your history. Because how else would you get people to accept your future worldview, which goes directly against the combined wisdom of everyone else that has ever lived? Traditions built up of the collective wisdom of generations. And you're like, no, I know better than that. Don't you understand? I'm 23. I know everything. Of course I'm not going to listen to you. What do you expect? Me to engage with you as a position of equals? No, instead we can go back, rewrite the past, make it all change to our new way of thinking. You know, the correct way of doing things. And it doesn't matter if it's done by people of absolutely zero talent, because those are the only people that are going to think this in the first place. No, it only matters that it agrees with us, that it changes the way that people that go back to those books and read them think in the future, that it takes away their ability to think critically and only allows them the ability to think like us. I used to think that bad scripts and movies were made by bad scriptwriters, and that's probably true as well. But when even good scriptwriters would be hamstrung, altered, have their ideas and principles completely destroyed because they disagree with an editor from absolutely nowhere who's achieved nothing, then is it any wonder the sheer lack of quality in anything being produced? I lack the ability to do it myself, and so instead, I'm just going to latch on and suck your profitability dry. I'm going to base my career on a threat. I'm going to run a protection racket in order to change the future. I'm going to run a protection racket in order to make sure that my ideas are enforced throughout society. I'm going to run a protection racket, and you know what? I'm going to say that's a good thing. And if you don't let me do it, well, it means you're a bad person. And you wouldn't want to be a bad person, would you? This is one of the most disgusting topics I think you can dive into. And the whole, we just do it for offense, is the surface layer of it all. But the more you dig, the worse it gets. And the question is, are these editors even listed in the credits, or are they actually just put under editors, rather than their preferred term to make them feel sensitive or authoritative? I'm an authority, I'm an expert, I'm a consultant. But there is one thing that'll always remain funny to me, and that is corporations paying people to destroy their profitability. The same companies that think it's not our job to make something entertaining for you. It's our job to change the world. Well, I hope those companies enjoy producing crap. I hope you enjoy burning piles of money, because that's what you're doing, and it's all voluntary. And all I'd say is, if I was a creative, if I was writing a book, if I was writing a script, quite frankly, I think I'd have more self-respect than allowing someone to come in with an agenda to destroy everything I'd worked for. But those are just my thoughts. What are yours? Let me know down in the comments below. Like the video if you like the video, subscribe, more videos like this in the future, and I will see you in the next one. Bye-bye.